The Rambo franchise is easily one of the most iconic action series ever made. At its peak in the 1980s, these movies absolutely dominated the box office. Back then, audiences couldn't get enough of one-man army action heroes, and John Rambo basically became the face of the entire era. It all started with First Blood in 1982. At the time, Sylvester Stallone was already a major star, but outside of Rocky, his box office track record honestly wasn't great. Rocky movies made huge money, but most of his other projects crashed pretty hard. And believe it or not, Stallone himself originally wanted nothing to do with Rambo. But he wasn't alone. Half of Hollywood looked at this script and basically said, absolutely not. Robert De Niro passed because he had just played a similar kind of character. Michael Douglas thought the entire concept sounded like a guaranteed flop. The only actors who seriously considered it were Al Pacino and Dustin Hoffman. But Pacino wanted to turn Rambo into an even more psychologically damaged Vietnam veteran, while Dustin Hoffman and director Mike Nichols wanted to strip almost all the action out of the movie entirely. The studio looked at all these ideas and basically said, yeah, no. So eventually the producers went crawling back to Stallone. The script was based on the novel First Blood by David Morrell, but Stallone immediately demanded rewrites. According to reports, Sly rejected 26 different versions of the screenplay before finally approving one, and the version he approved was the one he personally rewrote himself. The funniest part is what happened next. When the movie was finally finished, almost everyone who saw the rough cut hated it. Stallone himself was reportedly so horrified by the first version that he offered to buy the movie from the producers just so he could literally burn it. To be fair, the original cut was almost 3 hours long. Later, the movie was heavily trimmed down, cutting out most of Rambo's emotional breakdowns and flashbacks. The final theatrical version was only about 90 minutes long, and somehow that version worked perfectly. First Blood spent 3 straight weeks at #1 in the US. Made for $15 million, the movie pulled in around $125 million worldwide and turned Rambo into Stallone's second major franchise after Rocky. By the time work started on the second Rambo movie, Stallone had become one of the biggest stars on the planet. And at that point, nobody in Hollywood really told him no anymore. If Arnold Schwarzenegger was breaking budget records in the 90s with Terminator 2 and True Lies, then in the 80s it was Stallone leading the charge. Rambo First Blood Part 2 cost an insane $44 million. For comparison, Return of the Jedi cost only $32 million. Even Dune, which already looked ridiculously expensive at $40 million, was standing off to the side looking jealous. The sequel's screenplay technically came from James Cameron. Technically, because Stallone basically rewrote huge parts of it. Cameron later claimed that almost the only things left from his original script were the action scenes. According to him, there was barely any politics in his version at all. Stallone changed that completely and pushed the movie hard into Cold War anti-communist territory. Cameron's version also split the screen time between Rambo and another character who, at one point, was supposed to be played by John Travolta. But rumor has it Stallone hated the fact that the sidekick was funny and charismatic enough to steal scenes from him. So Sly cut most of the character out of the movie and replaced him with the prisoner subplot instead. And somehow the situation became even more absurd later, when James Cameron got nominated for a Razzie for the screenplay, even though almost none of his script survived. But back in 1985, nobody really cared what Cameron thought. At the time, he was just the guy who directed a small sci-fi movie called The Terminator and a low-budget horror sequel called Piranha 2. In Cameron's original version, the Colonel breaks Rambo out of a psychiatric hospital. Stallone changed it to a prison instead. Funny enough, Cameron would later recycle the psychiatric hospital idea in Terminator 2. When Rambo First Blood Part 2 finally hit theaters in '85, it completely exploded at the box office and earned around $300 million worldwide. And the craziest part is that it opened on the exact same day as the James Bond movie, A View to a Kill. Stallone absolutely crushed Bond at the box office, and the Bond franchise eventually ended up rebooting itself with a new actor shortly afterward. By the end of the year, Rambo finished as the second highest grossing movie of 1985, losing only to Back to the Future. Third place went to another Stallone movie, Rocky IV. This was basically the peak of Stallone's career. And it was after the second movie that Rambo stopped being just a character name and became part of pop culture itself. Originally, the movie was supposed to be called First Blood Part 2, but Stallone pushed hard to put Rambo directly into the title because he wanted audiences to associate the franchise with the character himself. The production also ran into problems with the Pentagon because some military officials in the movie were portrayed pretty negatively. As a result, the military refused to support the production, which massively increased the budget. According to the producers, if they had received the same military support that Top Gun got around the same time, they probably could have cut $10 million from the budget. But the funniest part is what happened afterward. Once the movie became a giant hit, the Pentagon suddenly had no problem using Rambo in recruitment campaigns and military advertising. By the mid-80s, Rambo had basically become one of the defining symbols of the Reagan-era American action hero. After the massive success of Rambo First Blood Part 2, the studio immediately moved forward with plans for a third movie. Director Russell Mulcahy was hired for Rambo III after catching Hollywood's attention with Highlander. The movie had flopped in theaters, but it quickly became a cult classic on VHS, and the studio rushed to lock Mulcahy down before somebody else grabbed him first. The screenplay came from Sheldon Lettich, who would later direct Jean-Claude Van Damme movies like Lionheart and Double Impact. Later, David Morrell would write a novelization of Rambo III based on the screenplay. But as usual, Stallone still wasn't fully happy with the script. The difference this time was that after the disappointing performance of Over the Top and the underwhelming box office numbers for Cobra, Sly was trying very hard not to scare the studio into thinking he had become impossible to work with. So during the first couple weeks of production, he mostly stayed quiet and let the directors do their thing. That lasted for a little while. After filming several scenes at a monastery in Thailand, director Russell Mulcahy traveled to Israel to cast Russian-speaking actors for supporting roles. And this trip basically detonated the entire production. According to Stallone, the problem was simple. He believed the Soviet soldiers in the movie needed to look terrifying. In his mind, these guys were supposed to look like absolute monsters. Instead, when Stallone arrived and saw the casting choices, he reportedly found a bunch of blonde male models who looked less like elite Soviet killers and more like a professional surfing team from California. Sly later claimed he wasn't threatened by them personally, but he simply couldn't take them seriously as villains. He told Mulcahy he wanted tougher, scarier-looking actors. Mulcahy apparently laughed at the suggestion and refused, which turned out to be a very bad career decision. Stallone went directly to the studio, and the studio immediately sided with its biggest star. Mulcahy got fired, and once the director left, the production basically started falling apart in real time. Cinematographer Michael Saracen, whose previous work included Birdie and Angel Heart, walked away from the project too. He was replaced by Ernest Day, known for A Passage to India. Then things somehow became even more chaotic. Ernest Day only lasted 1 week before also being replaced, this time by John Stanier from Death Wish 3. Meanwhile, Stallone replaced Mulcahy with Peter MacDonald, who was mostly known for low-budget cinematography work. At this point, Rambo III had basically turned into Sylvester Stallone Presents. Total creative control. After taking over, Stallone once again started rewriting huge portions of the script. The Soviet soldiers became more brutal, the monastery material got expanded, and Rambo was given a local companion character. Peter MacDonald would later admit in interviews that he tried to make Rambo feel more human by adding humor and softening the character a little. Stallone rejected almost all of it. MacDonald was frustrated, but there was really nothing he could do. By this stage, Stallone had become too powerful inside the production. All these delays, rewrites, firings, and production problems sent the budget completely out of control. In 1988, Rambo III officially became the most expensive movie ever made, with a budget of $63 million. Stallone himself received a record-breaking $16 million paycheck, which at the time was absolutely insane money for a Hollywood actor. But then came the disaster. When Rambo III finally opened in American theaters, audiences suddenly just didn't care anymore. The movie earned only $53 million domestically. For comparison, the second movie made around $150 million in the US alone. International markets helped soften the blow with another $135 million worldwide. But the drop from the previous film was massive. Critics trashed the movie, audiences were disappointed, and the studio immediately killed plans for a fourth Rambo film. After that, the franchise disappeared from theaters for almost 20 years. Early ideas for a fourth movie developed during the 80s were completely abandoned. And when Stallone finally returned to Rambo decades later, he came back with an entirely different story. Rambo III ended up receiving 5 Razzie nominations, while Stallone himself won Worst Actor. Richard Crenna and director Peter MacDonald also got hit with plenty of criticism. To this day, MacDonald still believes the movie got incredibly unlucky with its timing. Just weeks before the film's release, Soviet troops began withdrawing from Afghanistan. The story dominated news coverage, and almost overnight, Rambo III's entire Cold War premise suddenly felt outdated. And honestly, he may not be completely wrong about that. There's also a long-running belief in Hollywood that Peter MacDonald was never really the true director of Rambo III in the first place. Similar rumors surrounded George P. Cosmatos during Rambo First Blood Part 2 and Cobra. According to people who worked around these productions, MacDonald mostly handled technical preparation and second unit responsibilities, while Stallone personally directed many of the movie's major scenes himself. Unfortunately for MacDonald, his career never really recovered after Rambo III. The only widely known movie he directed afterward was Legionnaire with Jean-Claude Van Damme, nearly a decade later. By then, Van Damme's own career was already collapsing fast, and despite having a decent budget, Legionnaire went straight to video in most countries. As for Stallone, Rambo III became a major turning point in his own career too. After the movie, he suffered 4 box office disappointments in a row. Rocky V also underperformed badly and failed to meet expectations, just like Rambo III. Stallone's career could have completely fallen apart in the early 90s if 2 movies hadn't saved him in 1993, Cliffhanger and Demolition Man. But Hollywood giveth, and Hollywood taketh away. Because only a couple years later, Stallone got crushed once again by the gigantic box office disaster that was Judge Dredd. That was Frameback. Subscribe for more rewinds and see you on the next one.